drafting out of the scope management plan, the stakeholders come together, they analyze, they look at the requirements, and then they come together and then they reach an agreement on which of the requirements that they will be carrying out in the project. So once they agree on it, everybody is clear on what we are doing and what we are not doing. So this scope management helps that. And lastly, it ensures project success and stakeholder satisfaction, of course. So when you've been able to give an accurate budget, and at the end of the day, this was the budget you used, or when you say, oh, I'm going to finish this project on, say, the last day of November, and you were actually able to finish it on the last day of November, your stakeholders, they will be happy that you gave them a plan, you followed your plan, and your plan actually worked. You delivered what they want you to deliver, and you delivered it when you said you're going to deliver it. So that's it on the importance of scope management. Moving forward, we are going to be looking at the core components of scope management. This includes 6 major processes as identified by PMBOK. Number 1 is plan scope management. 2 is collect requirements. 3 is define scope. 4, we have it as create WBS. 5, validate scope. And lastly, control scope. Please, can we still hear me so that I make sure I'm not talking to myself?
Yes, can still hear you.
Okay, so we're going to be looking at these processes one after the other. The first one is plan scope management. So the plan scope management process is about deciding how scope will be managed throughout the project. And the output of this process is the creation of scope management plan. At the end of the day, this process, there's one thing that is expected. And that one thing is the scope management plan. The scope management plan is actually a document that will guide you on how to manage your scope during the execution phase of the project. So the scope management documents need to be able to answer some of this question. Number 1 question is how requirements will be collected. How do you plan on collecting the requirements for the project? There are different techniques that can be used. But before you decide on which technique you're going to be going for, you can actually go for one or more techniques depending on the kind of project you're handling. But you need to also think of who are my stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? Who is impacted by this project? Who is interested in this my project? Because it's until you identify your stakeholders before you know which technique I'm going to employ to get the requirements, to know this person's expectation of my project, or to know their needs, right? So some of the techniques we have is the observation, right? There's observation technique, there is focus group, there is also workshop. So workshop is more like an interactive session with your stakeholders to understand, and where you get to discuss the requirements for the project or talk about the whole project in general. That way you would come to an agreement with your stakeholders on the requirements that you people would be executing during the execution phase of the project. There are other techniques also that you can use, but it just all depends on the kind of project you're handling and the kind of stakeholders that you have. Then you will be able to identify which one is best for them. Another question that this scope management plan should be able to answer is how will the scope be defined, right? Once you are able to gather your requirements, how are we going to structure these requirements so that it's we can easily understand what needs to be done? How do you define these requirements that you've already gathered? So there are a couple of methods that you can use. First one is called the expert judgment. So take, for instance, what am I going to use as an example? Let's say you want to make stew, right? And it's your first time of making stew. The process where you go to, say, your mother or your sisters or somebody that you know they've been cooking stew for years, to tell them, okay, this is what I saw online or on how to make stew. Which one do you think is good? What am I going to do? How do you think? Which one is feasible? right? So expert judges are people that have years of experience in that field or in that project you're working on. You're going to meet them to understand the requirements, for them to look at the requirements that you've gathered already and tell you which one is feasible, which one is doable, right? So that is a good way for you to define your scope. So you can go to them to understand, okay, what are the technical limitations for this particular feature we want to do? Is it even possible for us to do it? Based on what we have, is it possible? What are the risks involved? Right? So you seeking their advice on way forward on the requirements you've gathered is a good way for you to define your scope. Another one or another method is product analysis. So when we talk about product analysis, it's more like you having a meeting with your stakeholders and your team or your team to look at the project or the product you want to build and then break it down into smaller pieces to better understand what needs to be delivered. So, for example, using my stew example, you can say, okay, you want to make stew, right? And for you to understand what and what you need to do, you can say, let me break down this whole process. Okay, I know I need to go to market. So when you think of you going to market as part of the whole cooking stew process, you now start thinking of, okay, I'm going to do which ingredients am I going to need, right? Because you've identified one section of it to be the need for you to go to the market. So you can then start understanding what and what am I going to be going to this market to do? Which ingredients do I need? So that's what this product analysis is all about. Breaking down the whole product into smaller pieces for you to better understand how or what you need to deliver rather. So the next method is known as alternative analysis. So alternative analysis is, there are so many ways for you to arrive at the same result, right? There are different options that you can take to arrive at the same result. So alternative analysis is a way for you to identify all those options and then choose the one that is best for you, right? Using the same stew example, because I believe that's what most of us that are not in the project management track would easily understand. Let's say you want to make stew. You know that there are some people that would decide not to do the whole frying process type of stew, but they will still arrive at the same result of having a product, which is the stew. There are people that will go through the frying process. So you identifying the different options that you can use to arrive at the same result, and then look at what am I most concerned about. So let's say, for example, you're somebody that you are thinking more of the budget. You don't want to overspend. You have a particular budget you're working on. You can say, okay, since it's the budget I'm so concerned about, I can decide to go for the non-frying method, because that way I get to save money for groundnut oil, right? Okay, but in a situation whereby, say, what matters to you more is quality, the people you're making the stew for are the people that like the fried stew method, and you're most concerned about impressing them, you can say, okay, I'm not concerned about the budget. Let's just do something that at the end of the day, the consumers or your users would like. You can decide to go through the best option for you. You can, maybe what you're most concerned about is the time. You don't want to spend so much time. You have somewhere you're going to. You don't want to spend so much time in doing a particular thing. You can then decide, okay, let me just do the non-frying method, since that one is very much easier and is faster. So that is what alternative analysis is all about. You identifying the different options you can go through to arrive at the same result, and then determining the one that is best for your project. And then the last method I have here is the facilitated workshop. So facilitated workshop is more like a meeting where you get to align with your stakeholders. You've talked to your expert judges. Mind you, you can also use 3 to 4 method, depending on the ones that suit your project best. You can use 2 method, you can use 3, you can use 4, however you want it. But make sure you're choosing the one that matters most to you, the one that would help you in the best way possible. So facilitated workshop is where you've already gathered your requirements, you spoke to the expert judges, you did your product analysis, you did the alternative analysis, and then you're coming to your stakeholders, which now also involves your project sponsor, to tell them, okay, this is the research we've done so far, this is the one that is feasible, this is the one that is not feasible. Which one do you people want? Which one are we now going for? You aligning with them to get their approval is what the whole facilitated workshop is all about. Now, the next question that your project management, your scope management plan should be able to answer is, how will scope be structured? How do you plan on structuring your scope? Would you need to create a work breakdown structure? That is another thing that needs to be written down in your documents. Another question is, how will the scope be managed, right? How do you plan on managing the scope so that there is no any form of scope creep? Is there need for me to create a change control process? Do you need it? If you need a change control process, then you need to add it to your document. A very simple change control process is, for example, if a stakeholder comes in during the execution phase of the project to say, there's a requirement I need to add, and this requirement is very important. There's this feature I want you to add to my app or to my website and all. They need to go through the change control. That change control process is very, very important and very vital for you to prevent any form of scope creep in your project. So it's like the person will first of all, or the stakeholder will first of all get the form, the change request form. So they would need to fill the form first. After filling the form, then the form will be submitted to the project manager. The project manager will then do what is known as impact analysis to understand how these requirements will be affecting that project. These requirements we are going to add, or we are about to add now, how is it going to affect the schedule? How is it going to affect the budget? Or what are the risks that follows these requirements? What are the risks we are going to have to deal with if we decide to agree to these requirements now? So after that, the project manager will then have to submit this his or her analysis to what is known as the change control board. So what this change control board is, just like people that will take the final decision on what needs to be done in your project, on whether the requirement is going to be approved or whether it's going to be rejected. So after he or she, the project manager, now has presented the analysis, they are going to look at it and then decide, do we have, okay, if we are saying we are going to add these requirements now, do we have the necessary funds to sponsor it? How much time is it going to take for us to complete these new requirements now? Do we have, can we afford that time? So they will now look at it and then they will make the final decision. And once that decision is made, for example, if it is accepted, the requirement is accepted, then the project manager will then need to update all the documents that has to do with that very project. I'm talking about the budget plan, the schedule plan, the risk plan. All the documents has to be updated to include the new requirement that has now been added. Then the next step is to inform the other stakeholders that, oh, CO, these requirements, the change control body accepted it and we are adding it. Or if the requirement was rejected, the phase of the project manager having to do the necessary updates will then be skipped, and then they will move forward to the next one, which is the one of informing the stakeholders about whether the requirement was accepted or rejected. So the next question that the scope management plan would also need to answer is, how will the deliverables be validated? After we are done creating our deliverable, how are we going to make sure that it meets the acceptance criteria? So there are a couple of ways to ensure. You can decide the method that you want to use, and these things are supposed to be added in the scope management plan. That is why I feel most project managers would prefer the waterfall project management method, because that one, it's very easy. I think so far it's the easiest, because there's a document that is going to guide you throughout everything you need to do. It is a type of project management method where if anything happens and the original project manager that was handling the project will not be able to continue. They can just give the next project manager the documents, and he or she would know where to start, because everything, they take out time to do proper planning and proper documentation. So anybody can pick up the documents and know where to start from. So you need to decide on before I deviate, which of the deliverables, how your deliverables will be validated. One way to do that is the user acceptance testing, right? This is where the users get to test the product you've built to confirm the functionality, what they told you that they want your app to have. Is it what you've done so far? So that is another way to test it. Another way I have here is demonstration and walkthrough. So that one is where the project manager would have to present the product to the stakeholders, show them how to utilize all the features and everything. Then they get to decide whether what they've built so far meets their requirements or not. Another one is to compare the acceptance criteria that was initially agreed upon and with the products you are showing them. That's another way to decide whether the product meets their requirements or not. So these are some of the methods you can use to validate the deliverables. And based on your project, you can choose the one that suits you better. Okay, moving on to the next thing, or the next process. Out of the 6 that I listed, we have the collection of the requirements, and this involves gathering all the expectation, needs, and features the stakeholders want. I've already talked about some of these methods that you can use. So once you are done with the whole scope management plan, the next phase is to now start gathering your requirements, because I mean, it's part of the things you added in your scope management plan. So some of the techniques, as I mentioned before, includes interviews, surveys, focus group, workshops, observation, and document analysis. So moving on, the output of this requirements collection is what is known as requirements documentation. After you've gathered your requirements, you need to then structure them very well and then put it in a document, and this document then becomes the requirements document. Another thing that is also expected after the requirements collection process is a requirement traceability matrix. So moving on to the next process. The next process will be to define scope. This involves conversion of all the requirements into clear and detailed description of what the project will deliver. And the key output of this is a project scope statement. I've initially explained this when I was talking about the project scope management plan. Just defining all your requirements that you've gathered, structure it, describe it well so that it's easily understandable. Anybody can pick up documents and know what you mean, right? So that is what the scope definition is all about. And this is a sample of the scope statement, where you have the description of the product, the acceptance criteria, the deliverables, the project exclusions, and also the constraints. Okay, moving on. The next process is create a WBS, which stands for work breakdown structure. The WBS breaks down the entire project work into smaller, manageable pieces, right? This is a sample. There's an end product, and then there are different deliverables under it. And once you've been able to identify the deliverables of that very product, you can then look at, okay, to be able to get this deliverable now, what work packages are inside to cook stew now? Okay, what and what, or the preparation or preparation phase of the stew, what and what do I need to do? You can now start thinking of, okay, I will need to fry my onion first. I will then have to go in with the tomato, which is the next work package. Okay, I would now have to add my ingredients and all. So breaking down these products into deliverables, and then from deliverables, the work package, is what the WBS is all about. And it's important to create this so that everybody can see what we are doing and where we are heading to. So the output of this WBS creation is obviously the WBS and also the WBS dictionary. Okay, the next process is to validate scope, and this involves getting the project sponsor or customer to formally accept the deliverables, right? As you've created the deliverables, you've done the project and everything, you need to get them to a way for you to get them to accept it. And the output of this is the list of the accepted deliverables and also the approved change request process. Once you've done your you've identified your deliverables, you present it to your stakeholders. These are the deliverables for this project. You people accept it. Is it okay? Can we move on? Once they say, okay, cool, this is good, there's a list for accepted deliverables, and then there's going to be, of course, their signature, very important there, so that tomorrow when they come back to say, I did not accept this, or I did not even know when we talked about this particular thing, you show them the document and their signature. Okay, this is it. You accepted it. So that's about the validate scope. The next one is to control scope. And this involves monitoring and managing any changes to the scope to ensure, one, that the work aligns with the defined scope. Two, no unauthorized changes enter. And lastly, all scope changes follows the change control process. And yes, we've come to the end of the presentation. Do we have any questions before I ask mine? Any questions? Okay, I believe the silence means no question. All right, I'm going to ask mine. The first